Hello, I'd like to welcome you to the session where we're going to be presenting the 2020 A.L. Patterson Award. The ACA created this award to recognize outstanding research in the structure of matter by diffraction methods, including significant contributions to the methodology of structure determination and/or innovative application of diffraction methods and/or elucidation of biological, chemical, geological, or physical phenomenon using new structural information. It was created in the name of Lindo Patterson to honor Lindo's many contributions to our field. Lindo Patterson came from a British family, was born in New Zealand, and was raised and got his PhD at McGill while living in Montreal. While an unpaid visitor after graduation in B.E. Warren's lab at MIT, in 1934 he became interested in the properties of reflection intensities and came up with what we now call the Patterson series. Jenny Glusker has told me that Lindo was a very modest man who would only refer to his own work as what he called the F-squared series. I'm not sure how those of you who are not well supplied with gray hair know about use of Patterson maps, since we have many other ways to solve crystal structures now. But this was really the first systematic way to solve heavy atom structures and was a key tool in crystallography for the perhaps 50 years after its initial development. In 1936, Lindo joined the faculty of Bryn Mawr College, and in 1949, he moved to what's now known as the Fox Chase Cancer Institute to start an early biological crystallography group. This award is given every 3 years, and the winner receives an honorarium of $1,500. Here's a list of some of the most illustrious members of our community who have won the award in prior years. And I'm proud to announce that in 2020, the A.L. Patterson Award is going to Václav Petříček. With the exception of a postdoctoral position with Phil Coppens in SUNY Buffalo, Václav has spent essentially his entire career at the Czech Academy of Sciences, although it wasn't always called that. Over the course of his career, Václav's research has made him a leader in the field of analysis of incommensurately modulated crystals using the superspace approach. Václav is being recognized today for development of crystallographic computing methods for aperiodic chemical and magnetic structures. Much of what he's developed has gone into the Jana series of computer programs, which is widely applied to all types of structures, not only aperiodic ones, not only modulated ones. He devotes considerable time to teaching about Jana in workshops. Through his work, many 3+N periodic crystals, the so-called incommensurately modulated structures, can now be determined with an accuracy comparable to what people can achieve with ordinary periodic structures. I personally would like to thank Václav for his help in my team for helping to implement superspace crystallography. I was impressed to see that the webpage at Václav's Institute volunteers that Václav can help in structural analysis of challenging samples. So I welcome you to reach out to him with your problems. I'd like to congratulate Václav, and I'm very excited to hear what he'll be presenting.
Dear friends, first of all, I would like to thank American Crystallographic Association for this special award. However, this award is connected with my name, but in fact, all what I did in this field was done with close collaboration with people working in field of modulated structures. The lecture will be divided into several topics. First, I would like to make some introduction where I would like to say how to recognize modulated structures. I will make some historical remarks, and I will introduce some basic ideas about superspace approach. Then I will concentrate on data collection process, solution and refinement. I will explain what kind of programs can be used, then interpretation of results, magnetic structures, and finally I would like to say some words about the new Jana 2020. The fact that the structure is modulated can be very easily recognized from diffraction pattern. Except of main spots which are making lattice, three-dimensional lattice in three-dimensional space, we can observe additional diffraction spots which are regularly spaced, called satellites, diffraction spots, and they can be indexed also, but with using one additional or more additional diffraction vectors. The effect of presence of additional diffraction spots was observed even a long time ago. For example, from this paper by Patterson, you can see that normal reflections were accompanied by two satellites at these positions, and they have already explanation for this, that the presence of satellites is associated with main reflections are consequence of original assumption involving simple harmonic distortion. Later it was shown that this modulation can be also induced by occupation modulation in crystal, which was published in these two papers, and something very specific that was also found that some composite crystal can be also described like modulated structures using more subsystems. All diffraction spots of classical crystals can be indexed with the three reciprocal vectors. However, for modulated structures, we need one or more modulation vectors, which are generally incommensurate with a reciprocal lattice. This means that basic property of classical crystal is violated, but in some very regular way. Problem is how to measure routinely intensity of additional satellite diffractions. Fortunately, nowadays most of diffractometers are already supporting measuring such intensities. Second problem was how to handle symmetry of such system, how to calculate structure factors, and finally how to solve modulated structures. For description and solution of modulated structures, we are using superspace theory. This theory was developed by Peter de Wolf, Ted Janssen, and Aloysius Rami. They were awarded by two prizes, Aminov Prize in 1998 and Ewald Prize in 2014. Let me demonstrate introducing of superspace for description of modulated structures with help of simplified model. Say that we have one-dimensional crystal where we have this main spot which are displaced by this A3 star, and we have also additional diffractions, additional satellite spot which are displaced by this vector Q. You can see that this diffraction pattern has no lattice character. For making some lattice character, we have to introduce artificially additional diffraction vector which is perpendicular to our diffraction space. Then we have chance to move all diffraction spots out of this plane artificially and make new lattice vectors, which are all two lattice vectors, where this A4 star, it's just summation of these two Q vectors, and now we have already a lattice. The lattice character in this artificial two-dimensional space means that by Fourier transform, which represents some diffraction experiment, will have translation periodicity. So we are in fact returning back to crystallography. We have again translation symmetry of our object. But reality is different because this diffraction pattern has no lattice character, and from lattice character we have to return to this real space, which means by projecting back from this artificial space to this original one-dimensional crystal. Here you can see example of positional modulating structures as it is described in this artificial direct two-dimensional space. You can see that in the first cell and in the second cell, third and fourth cell, these atoms are located at different positions. But description of this artificial cell in direct space, it's showing some modulation curve, and from this curve we can in fact derive all positions of atoms in actual cell. You can see that because of this translational symmetry, we can move this position, this atom position of the second cell to first cell, and translational symmetry from third cell to first cell again, and the same with this fourth cell. With this we can see that this curve in this first cell is describing all possibilities of positions, atoms, which are produced by section which is perpendicular to this E vector. So real structure as derived from this artificial description in direct space, it's produced by a section of this periodic density in two-dimensional artificial space. But we can also move this line a little bit down, and we can see another situation in crystal, which means that we can make different structures by different sampling with different sections. If this modulation vector is really incommensurate, all these sections are equivalent. All what demonstrated in previous slides can be generalized into three-dimensional space. Then the diffraction pattern for radial, for normal structure, is we have in diffraction pattern, we have three-dimensional lattice, and we have translational symmetry in charge densities. Translational symmetry in three-dimensional space. For modulated structures, we have additional diffraction spots, which can be described like this, and then we have some generalized density described in 3+d dimensional space. The fact that generalized electron density has a translational symmetry in superspace, we can make expansion of this density into Fourier coefficients. These Fourier coefficients, structure factors, are related with measured intensities of main and satellite reflections. Only difference with respect to three-dimensional structures is that this structure factor now is a function of 3+d indices. Symmetry in the superspace is defined by its basic property. Generalized density is invariant with respect to symmetry operations. Symmetry operations is supposed to save distances in superspace, and then we can make matrix representation of this symmetry operation where this R, it's matrix 3. Now it's 3+d by 3+d instead of 3 by 3, and d it's a vector of with 3+d coefficients. This means that we have now set of operations, and this set of symmetry operations makes so-called superspace group. As mentioned in previous slides, we are working now in superspace where the symmetry is described by matrices which are 3+d by 3+d. However, for description of modulated structures, there are some strict restrictions which makes this description in higher dimensional space easier. First of all, if we are taking only main reflections, we can derive the symmetry of this 3 by 3 matrix and translation part only from main reflections. Second point, internal space cannot be mixed with external one, because this artificial vector which we introduce is perpendicular to our space and cannot be changed, cannot be moved from this superspace to real space, which means that these columns are equal to 0. So this means this make big reduction of these properties. And something more, from properties of modulation vector, we can find this special equation which makes a relationship between modulation vector and this gamma E, gamma I, gamma M. This allows to fully determine this metrics which is used for symmetry. This means that if we know three-dimensional symmetry which follows from main reflections, we can conclude about this rotation part completely. And also for translation part here, only new information, it's about this SI, which means that is some relationship of modulation waves with, if we are applying symmetry, how these two modulation waves are related. The superspace theory can be used in data collection and in data reduction procedure. You can use this theory to generate symmetrically independent reflection in order to plan single crystal experiment or to model powder diffraction pattern. For merging symmetry, we can use also superspace theory, and moreover, we can also simply derive systematic extinction, which includes also satellite reflections. For superspace, the superspace theory can be used also in solution and refinement and interpretation of modulated structures. First, can be used to simplify calculation of structure factors by using of symmetry. It can be used to produce Fourier transform, Fourier synthesis in 3+D dimensional space, and calculation of geometric characteristics, something like distances, angles, bond valence sum for modulated structures. After paper of De Wolf, Janssen, Jana was published in 1981, we could start developing of problems for modulated structures. Generally, any structural parameter, this means site occupancy, position, ADB parameters, can be modulated. Actual values are calculated from so-called modulation function, which have periodicity 1. This periodicity allows us to make expansion into Fourier coefficients, and this P0, PSN, PCN are parameters which are to be solved and refined during structure solution. The structure factor is to be integrated along this line again from x4 0 to x4 plus 1, and this process is time consuming. We can use analytical methods, which means that for occupancy, in fact, we have very simple formula. For position, it's a little bit more complicated. We have to use Bessel function. And for ADB parameters, we have to use so-called modified Bessel function. However, if we have combination of all these effects, or if we have more harmonics than one, then this analytical method, it's very difficult because we have to make convolution of all previous functions. For this reason, we are preferring method numerical, where we are making integration along this line numerically. For a very long time, these monolithic structures were understood for like some curiosity, not having practical importance, like sodium carbonate studied by De Wolf. But number of studied modulated crystals grew with improving experimental facilities, imaging plate, CCD detectors. Real importance of modulation in crystal has been demonstrated by studies of organic conductors and superconductors and high temperature bismuth superconductors, where the property, physical property of crystal is related to modulation in crystal. The modulation can be present in very simple compound like oxides, but we can find modulation also in modulated protein crystal like this. Special importance has this material, magnetic materials, where we can, with the modulation, we can observe some helical, cycloidal, skyrmion magnetic moments. The first task during the data collection process is finding orientation metrics, cell parameters, and modulation vectors. For this, we can use programs which are supplied with diffractometer, which means for Bruker system or for Oxford diffraction system, we have some software which is very similar what is presented here, but here I'm presenting something which is from Jana 2006. You can see from this diffraction pattern after fast handling of reflection, that except of very strong reflections, we have some additional reflections which are much weaker. You can also see that in this direction we have this position somewhere between these two main lines, but for the second line it's almost 1/3, but not exactly. First step is to find basic cell. The basic cell we can find interactively, or we can ask program to make it automatically. Then if we have basic cell, we can continue this process, and we can project all diffraction spots into one. When we have already this basic lattice, we can make some projection of all diffraction spots, including satellites, into the basic cell. Then we have some additional information about the satellite spot, and from this we can localize modulation vectors. For this case, in fact, we have more than one modulation vector. From this projection, we can see that we really need two modulation vectors to describe all satellite spots. These so-called combined satellites are not present in this case, but they are probably too weak to be detected in fast hunting procedure. As a next step, we can make a refining of orientation metrics. We can get these metric tensor cell parameters and also modulation vectors. Now we are ready to make data collection and to integrate properly main and satellite reflections. Just a short history remark. Data collection with 4-cycle diffractometer of point detector was extremely time-consuming. Average time for one reflection was about 220 seconds, and for 10,000 reflections, it was necessary to spend 14 days on diffractometers. For modulated structure with only fast order satellites, this changed from 14 to 42 days, but only if the satellites were strong enough. But average time for weak satellites reflection, it's usually much longer, and this means that this time, this 42 days, it's even longer. Now with area detectors, making data collection of its modulated structure is generally not very different from data collection of regular non-modulated crystal. For a very long time, for solution and refining of modulated structures, we were first starting with so-called average structure. This can be solved by standard way and using only main reflection. Of course, then structure, it's not describing modulation, but we have some average structure where instead of different positions from cell to cell, we have usually large temperature parameters, or for occupation modulation, from time to time, we have also split atom positions. After having this average structure, we could start refinement with small amplitudes of modulation parameters. Recommended strategy was to refine first modulation of atoms exhibiting some anomalies like large ADPs and split positions. Another possibility is to start refinement several times with randomly chosen small amplitudes of modulation parameters. But also some very specific direct methods were developed by Professor van Eyfel, and it was used to solve several structures. Another alternative was to use heavy atom method based on Patterson function that was used by Walter Steurer and also in our group. This method was just taking one particular peak, Patterson peak, and making some more detailed analysis of Patterson peak in 4-dimensional space. Nowadays, we can use advantage of charge flipping method, which makes for us some small revolution in solving of modulated structures. For regular structures, this algorithm was developed by Gábor Oszlán in Switzerland, and for modulated structure by Lukáš Palatinus, and finally, with collaboration with Červé Šapy, the program of Superflip was finished and used for solution of structure. It is applicable to even for strongly modulated crystal having discontinuous modulation, so it's a very general program. And in most cases, the starting model, it's good enough to start refinement of modulated structure. So it's really some revolution in solving of modulated structures. Here I would like to mention one big difference between structure analysis of regular crystal and structure analysis of modulated crystals. For regular structure analysis, we have to select some set of parameters which are describing the structure. It can be normal, position, ADP parameters. It can be anharmonic parameters. It can be charge density parameters. But the number of parameters when we are solving some structure is more or less clear. But for modulated structure, we have the same problem, but additional problem is how each parameter is modulated. What kind of function to use to describe modulation of each parameter. For this, we are using very often so-called devolve sections. This is section through four-dimensional space, taking just one atomic position and following the modulation curve along this expo coordinate. You can see that is very closely related to original devolve paper from 1974. It's another example using of devolve section. This is demonstrating just occupation modulation in crystal, map which is produced in Jana, and the same map produced in original devolve paper. From this you can see that these maps can help you to find proper modulation of each atom in the structure. Devolve sections can also be used to make analysis of Patterson map. Then we can take one peak, particular peak, which follow from average structure, and make a Fourier map, make Patterson map for this specific position. Then from the broadening of this peak in three different directions, we can conclude about position modulation of heavy atom. This method was used in our paper a long time ago, and it's a little bit difficult method, but it's nice presentation of modulation in crystal. The devolve sections can also be used to find to correct the final model by using a difference Fourier map. Then from these differences we can conclude how many harmonics we need and if we need also modulation of ADP parameters. In some cases, the modulation functions are not smooth, and the number of harmonic waves necessary to describe such function would be very large. For such cases, a special function can be used to reduce number of parameters in a refinement and to make more realistic model. One of such function, which is called Krenel function, it's in fact a step-like function where the atom is fully occupied in some region and it's not occupied at all outside of this region. This function was described in our original paper. Another very nice application of Krenel function is positional modulation with some discontinuity. Then the function can be divided into two parts with two Krenel functions and used instead of many harmonics, use just step-like function, shorter and longer, and very simple modulation position function. Another specific function was used for bismuth superconductor 2212, where the oxygen atom was almost linearly modulated with some discontinuity. With using this special sawtooth function, the number of parameters was considerably reduced and structure was correctly described. First program for refining of modulated structure was written by Akai Yamamoto in 1982. This program was able to use up to 3 modulation vectors. It was using full advantage of superspace symmetry, numerical method for calculation of structure factor. This numerical method was based on Gaussian integration, a very nice twinning option in this program, and later was also developed program for refining of modulated structures from powder diffraction data. Another program developed in 80s was written by Lodek Pachorek and Damian Kucharczyk in Goroshinsky. This program, MSR, was based on numerical integration. However, also Bessel functions and generalized Bessel function expression was implemented also. This program was mainly for single crystal refinements. Another program for powders was developed. This XND was developed by François Berard and Guido Baldinosi, and they used again numerical integration, and this program was based on the Rietveld refinement algorithm. Nowadays, this modulated option was implemented also into GSOS program, the newest GSOS program, and new program, Full-Prof program. The program Jana, first version, was developed during my stay in Philip Koppen's lab in 1994 with close collaboration with Pierre Becker. First version was based on molecular approach to modulation because main interest at the time was modulation in organic conductors and in organic superconductors. Latest version of Jana, which is Jana 2006, works up to 3 dimensions, including composite structures, modulation of occupancies, positions, ADP parameters up to 6th order, and harmonicity. Side symmetry restrictions are derived analytically from symmetry operations. This means that all equations which are used to restrict parameters are derived from linear equation following from symmetry. You can produce also Fourier maps of different type, Patterson Fourier, difference Fourier, and make default sections. It can handle meroidric, reticular, and pseudo-meroidric twinning. It can combine also data from different sources, X-ray, neutron, powder data, and also now electron diffraction data. Latest version can be also used to refine magnetic structure, modulated or non-modulated ones. Similarly, as for regular structures, we are also calculating interatomic distances, angles, torsion angles, planes, Montvallen sum as a function of internal coordinate t, which means how they are changing from cell to cell because of modulation. For composite structure, it's very specific. If we are taking only composite principle, which means different periodicity in these two subsystems, we can get functions like this. You can see that here for distances between oxygen and strontium atom, we have very different minimum distances, and here, for example, we have 2 different distances and very long ones. Here we have 2 little bit longer than here, but it makes in fact no real sense. If we are going to composite structure with modulation, the situation looks very different. The modulation between these 2 subsystems makes these distances almost constant. For 2 oxygen strontium distances almost constant. This means the driving force of our modulation is distance between strontium and oxygen. Drawing programs such as Mercury, Diamond, or Vesta cannot handle superspace symmetry. For this reason, Jana is generating artificial CIF file which contains some region of structure where all atoms are generated by superspace symmetry. Unfortunately, any change of fell means that we have to return back to Jana and create new ZIF file. However, there are already some programs which can directly draw modulated structures. One of these is Gmodel for modulated structures made by Patterson. This is a very powerful program which can be used. It's freely accessible. Another program is Molecule QT, written by Christian Hipschel. This program can be used also for charge entity studies and for modulated structure as well. A new Jana 2020 allows also direct drawing of modulated structures with using all parameters and all specialties which are part of program system Jana. How important it's to describe the modulated structure completely. See, the following structure was solved in like average structure, but then the distances makes absolutely no sense, and problem was also that positions were not fully occupied. This average structure cannot give a real answer how the structure looks like. In the case that we are taking into account occupational modulation, we can see that some positions are occupied, some positions not. Then short distances will disappear and structure makes much better sense. However, this is not everything, because this occupational modulation can also induce some additional positional modulation in structure. This we will see in next figure. If you are taking into account also positional modulation, you will see that these tellurium atoms are making more space if here it's germanium and less space if here it's tantalum atom, which means that the structure to be fully described, we have to use occupation and also positional modulation. This interpretation of result gives final answer how the real structure looks like. Here you can see how the structure is changing if we are going from cell to cell. It looks like that atoms are moving in time, but it's not true. What we are presenting here is just different situation which can happen in the same part of structure somewhere in crystal due to modulation. This is very easy way how to see all different configuration in crystal structure, in modulated crystal structure. Last year, I was intensively working on new option in Jana for magnetic structures. I did this work in close collaboration with Juan Manuel Perez Mato, Harold Stokes, Benton Campbell, and Juan Rodriguez Carvajal. For symmetry concept, I used magnetic space group as developed by Russian scientists, namely Alexei Vasilyevich Shubnikov. Magnetic moments by physical nature, it's axial vector. And this was used in all symmetry relationship in program Jana. And also, we had to take into account that any symmetry operation can be combined with time inversion, which inverse magnetic moment. Symmetry operation, then, for regular structure, is described by rotation matrix, by time inversion operator and translation part. For position, it acts like this. This means I is changing by this equation. For magnetic moment, we have, of course, no translation part, but we have here time inversion, and here it's this determinant of this rotation part, which means it's taking into account that the magnetic moment is axial vector. Set of symmetry operations of magnetic crystal makes magnetic space group. For description of magnetic modulated structures, we can again use the superspace approach as developed by De Wolf, Janssen, and Jana. But here we have to take into account that our magnetic moment is axial vector, and moreover that each operation can be combined with time inversion operator. This was described in these two papers. Magnetic moments can be again expanded into Fourier series, where we have this zero term, sinus terms, and cosinus term. Any symmetry operation in magnetic superspace group can be expressed in matrix form. This rotation path and translation path are same like for nuclear structure. Only new information, it's this theta part, which means this time inversion part. The time inversion part for simplest symmetry operation identity can be combined with translation along internal space. With a zero, it's operation which we can call like pure time inversion, and that one is shifted time inversion in superspace. Solution and refining of magnetic structure can be difficult task, especially in case when we are using data from unpolarized neutron diffraction experiment. Then the general function which is describing distribution of magnetic moment in space is a vector function, but our entities are only scalar. For solution, we can find that several space groups, magnetic space groups, are making almost exactly same result, and we have to really go through all possible symmetries. Unfortunately, even extinction rules and Lava symmetry, it's not enough to distinguish correct model only from diffraction data. So for this, we are combining representation analysis with group theory, and for each irreducible representation, we can derive symmetry, lowest possible symmetry of magnetic groups, which is called kernel symmetry. Except of kernel symmetry, we can have also epikernel symmetry, which for two and higher dimensional irreducible representation follows from the sequence of subgroups and supergroups. Then we have a lot of possibilities which must be tested to find correct solution. Unfortunately, not always we can get unique solution. Then we have to use some additional experiment, physical experiment, to compare arrangement of magnetic moments in space and to find the best solution. Representation analysis in Jana, it's a powerful method how to find proper solution. However, this representation analysis, as implemented in the latest version of Jana, it's still very limited. For more complicated cases where we are combining more irreducible representation, or we are working in 3+2 or 3+3 dimensional cases, then we have to use some advanced techniques. One of the best is ISO-distort program developed by Stokes, Campbell and Edge, and this program can be used from internet. This program allows you it's a very general program. You can make not only study of magnetic distortion in crystal, but also positional occupational distortion of crystal. The program can be used directly from Jana. You can call this page, make analysis, export zip files, and import it into Jana. So we have full support for ISO-distort program in Jana programs. Another approach is that we can go to Bilbao crystallographic server. In this big crystallographic server, you can find a lot of very useful tools. You have also special tool for magnetic symmetry and applications. Here you can use group-subgroup relationship, many things, and you can export these results to magnetic zip file, and then again you can import this result into Jana and make final refinement. Another problem is how to visualize the result of magnetic structure refinement. For this, we can use freeware program Vesta, which can draw regular structures and also magnetic structures. For magnetic structure, it's using directly magnetic symmetry, which means that we can use this magnetic zip file to send it to Vesta and draw structure. For modulated structures, magnetic modulated structures, we have problems because Vesta is not supporting superspace symmetry. But then we can use an option in Jana to create, where we can create large cell, artificial cell, which take into account that in each discrete cell the position is changed by modulation. Finally, I would like to say some words about new program Jana 2020, which was developed during last 2 years. The program is not completely finished and it will be open for testing approximately in September. You can see the basic window of Jana 2020, and what you can see here that the structure can be visualized even during refinement process, and you can see how the structure is changing from cycle to cycle. Moreover, what you can do here is after refining, you can modify parameters directly from this figure, and you can start a new refinement. All these Jana options are accessible from different things. For powders, you can make very similar, and then you can see how the profile is changing from cycle to cycle. Here you can see how the program can be used to show how the structure is changing by modulation. This one is for regular structure, but the same algorithm can be used also for magnetic structure, where we can see how magnetic moments is changing from cell to cell. Here you can see modulation in 3 different directions of one of my magnetic modulated structure. In the lecture, I try to demonstrate that solution and refining of modulated structures is more or less routine work. Data collection and data reduction with more than 3 indices can be done with regular integration programs as supplies with diffractometers. Superspace group can be determined in an analogical way, like for 3-dimensional structures, but now with using superspace. For structure solution, we can use powerful program Superflip. Structure refinement allows us to use different modulation functions for occupancies, positions, and also ADP parameters. Interpretation of result, for this we can use calculation of distances and angle of bond valence sum as a function of modulation in crystal. We have also possibility to visualize structure with specific programs like Gmol, Molecule Qt, and Jana 2020. Here you can see some monographies which are devoted to incommensurate crystallography to modulated structures. One is written by Sander van Smalen, and another one is aperiodic crystal written by Ted Jansen, Gervais Chappy, and Marc Boissier. My first step in field of modulated structure and the first version of Jana were made during my stay in Philip Coppen's lab in 1984. Philip recognized a long time before discovering high DC superconductors how important role plays modulation in crystals for property of materials. My stay in this lab was changing my scientific line completely. I would like to mention also my collaboration with Sander van Smalen, University of Bayreuth, Juan Manuel Perez Mato, Bilbao University, Nadia Volotina from Moscow University, Andrei Mironov, State University of Moscow, Sven Lidin, Stockholm University, Lund University, Gervais Chappy, Alav Aracheva, University of Lausanne, Michel Ivan, Philippe Beniard, Guido Balnizzi, Theo Woike, Dominique Chaniel, Jürg Schäffer, Peter Fischer, Pascal Roussel, Olivier Mentor, Dominique Rebé, Olivier Perez, Philippe Poulet, and Olivier Courtin. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so we're going back live, and I'd like to, first of all, correct myself. I was told that your name should be pronounced Václav, not Václav, and Petříček. Is that close?
Yeah, it's a yes.
Okay, well, thank you on that. I've also gotten some feedback that my comments about gray hair are not necessarily welcome. So I would like to make sure that I point out that the ACA is open and welcoming to crystallographers at all stages in their career. But some of us do have longer term memories in terms of crystallography than others. Anyway, let me move on to questions. I'd like to open the floor for questions. We have one already, but I'm inviting people to please add additional questions to the question and answer box. And the first question we have is, why do certain materials form modulated crystal lattices? What is the driving force?
We cannot say for all crystals, all reasons. Say that we have something like a composite crystal. In composite crystal, you have two different periodicities, and these different columns or planes are interacting together and disturbing this original periodicity. That's one reason. So we have two or more building principles in crystals which are not commensurate. The same is for magnetic structures. Also very clear that the ordering of magnetic moment can be different, can have different periodicity than crystal. And then we have some additional effects interacting of these magnetic moments. So we have two different building principles in the magnetic crystal. And so for organic crystal, it's a little bit more complicated, but usually for this we can find that you have, say, a little bit larger space in room temperature for these molecules. And if you are cooling this, you can introduce some additional ordering because of different interaction with neighbors. So this modulation can be present in very different compounds, and the reason for this can be a little different for different systems.
Okay, we've had one question in the chat box. I'm going to ask that person to please put that question, if they can, into the Q&A, the question and answer, because then everybody can see it. Okay, so going on to another question. Congratulations on winning the Patterson Award. What's your perspective on the next development for modulated protein structure?
Yes, you probably know I am working not in this protein crystallography, but some groups are already working on this problem. I would like to mention people I mentioned in lecture. They are trying to modify these programs, which are typical programs for protein crystallography for modulation. Of course, they are using quite different technique, how to calculate structure factors, how to refine these things. But the superspace theory, it's used in a very similar way. Of course, then we are more concentrating on some molecular parts and making some molecular modulation. But this is in progress, and you have to follow a little bit of literature. I think in few years it will be some program to modulate, but there are not so many modulated structures. But that was same for this normal crystallography. At the beginning, we had just few examples, and now this effect of modulation is very common.
Okay. Next question. Is it possible to induce modulated structure in a conventional lattice by playing with atomic sites, parenthesis, doping, reactions, etc., for a particular system? Are there examples of high pressure induced modulated structures?
Yes. This is true. If you are playing with a different composition of crystals, or if you are applying pressure, you can induce new phases. And of course, because you have, again, some competition of different forces, you can make also modulated structures. It's well known for this simple metals under pressure, where they observed composite character of these systems, and also they find these structures like modulated structures.
Thank you. Okay. Last question is from Branton Campbell, and he did not put this in the question and answer box, but thank you, Václav, for a wonderful talk. You have made incommensurate to structure, determinant, and refinement accessible to the world. What are your top future priorities in this area?
Yeah, it's for me, it's very important to continue with magnetic structures, because I think it's a very nice field to show importance of this superspace approach, and especially for materials where we have some interaction between positions and magnetic moments. It's something, some nice chance for crystallography to contribute to physics of these systems. So that's my main priority for this field. For future. First finish 2020 and after to continue with this.
Okay, unfortunately I'm being accompanied by Rocky, who's on both sides of the sidewalk, but anyway, hopefully I can be heard over him. Wonderful, this is coming from Vic Young, who is one of our new ACA fellows. Wonderful lecture. Congratulations on winning the Patterson Award. Please speak about the new facilities in Jana 2020.
Yeah, probably main reason why I was starting completely new graphic interface was that this program, this old program in 2006 was based on graphic which was developed long time before some graphic libraries exist, and was written in specific way. And nowadays, almost no one can make changes in Jana 2006 than me. And this new 2020, I hope it will be more friendly for future, for people to using this code and to develop new things in future. So that's one thing. And another thing, I was trying to make this program more friendly for users, which means to make editing directly from picture and to see how it's changing during refinement and all this stuff. It's now much easier.
Again, that's wonderful. I think that we've reached the end of our time. And I'm not sure, it's probably quite late despite the sunny sky behind you, what we see for you. So I would like to thank you. I would like to express that right now there are all across the world people applauding for you right now, but you just can't hear them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.